Okay, so we are recording. So I will characterize power imagery and devotion imagery of Sumerian art. We're almost done with it, and then we'll move on to Akkadian and Babylonian. And so the other site that we have is the site of Ur, and Ur has an enormous temple structure. What's this platform called? What's the vocabulary that we would use here for the white temple as well? What is this platform called? Who can help me out?
Ziggurat.
A ziggurat. So this is a really large ziggurat. It's been reconstructed. You can see the temple still missing from the top, but the structure is in great condition, especially this bottom view here. This gives you a real idea of kind of the pomp and circumstance that was probably used for like special ceremonies that took place at the temple. And so this center aisle here, right, the center one, was probably ceremonially used for the gods, right? The gods or the rulers would have like the most direct access up to the temple at the top. So you would have to be of like high rank to be able to use that center one. And then people of high rank or priests would use these side stairways and ramps to get up to the top of the temple. So remember that it's a sense of a journey, and the ziggurats are symbolic of what kind of structure which many gods live in. What does it represent?
Like a mountain.
A mountain, very good. Right, so we see that with the Greeks as well. So here's a reconstruction of what we think that ziggurat and temple structure looked like at Ur. So it had a series of platforms and buildings on top of each other, right? And then outside of Ur's ziggurat, there was a graveyard that was excavated. And there was a number of really important pieces that came from here. This is called the ox lyre. And so they think it was a musical instrument. It had a gold bull head with lapis lazuli. So see that beard and the eyes and the hair at the top? It was, it had lapis lazuli. Does anyone know where that comes from? Lapis lazuli? It only comes from one place in the entire planet. Does anyone know where it comes from? It comes from Afghanistan. So this shows that Sumeria was already trading with distant lands. And so this blue is the lapis lazuli is what we use to make ultramarine blue. And so along the Silk Road, this is something that was traded to make really brilliant blue paint. So like in the Renaissance, when Michelangelo is painting the Sistine Chapel, or Giotto is painting his wall of the Arena Chapel, and we have these really beautiful blues, it's coming from Afghanistan. So this big bull head is, really kind of cool. This wooden structure didn't exist. It deteriorated in the cave or in the grave. But this image that we have on the front, as well as the bull image, was found. And we think that these images came from the Epic of Gilgamesh. And so we have these bulls with human heads. We have that kind of, we have that formal sort of presentation where the figures are front view shoulders, but then their legs are in profile. So we have that composite view. And remember that Egyptians also had this view. But I keep hitting the wrong slide here, so I apologize. Really cool animal creatures with offerings to the gods, the bull lyre itself right here being played. So it lets us know that this was a musical instrument. And this really cool scorpion guy. Look at this scorpion guy at the very bottom. So really interesting details, all very stylized and formal. But there was many like votives. And so you can see that bull imagery was repeated a lot in this area. So bulls would represent what? What do bulls typically represent? What do you think? relates to our theme today.
Like
What do,
power.
exactly. So bulls are power. So probably the graves that we're looking at were probably rulers, right? Here's a really unique gold piece of this goat god, right? There's the cylinder made out of alabaster that was very popular from these burials as well. And you can see how it's organized in rows. We call that registers. We have a lot of cylinder seals. So these are little, and it depends on what they're made out of. Sometimes they're carved out of stone and then they're pressed into clay. It's almost like a stamp. And normally they denote people. So like if you were trading something, you would roll your image from your cylinder seal onto a piece of clay to say, oh, this came from so-and-so. So it's a way of marking and naming things. Sometimes they have decoration on them. So this one has like a little sacrificial lamb or bull at the very top. And then it impresses the texture into the clay. Right? So the piece that we have in the 250 is called the Standard of Ur from the Royal Tomb of Ur. And all of the information on this standard is organized into registers. So registers is a vocabulary term for us. So a register is this horizontal element that's used to organize visual information. It typically tells a story. So of course, our focus today is going to be on what is that story. So go ahead and jot that down. So what's a standard? Does anyone know what a standard is? What's a standard? Anyone know what a standard is? It's kind of a strange thing. So the function of a standard is it almost is like a flag. So we think, and this is still kind of speculation that it is an actual standard. It probably was on a pole. So it was probably be something that was on a tall pole. It would probably something that you would mark in a, like march with, like in a ceremony or in warfare. And it would have emblems of power on it, right? So this denotes a ruler because it comes from a royal tomb, and then some sort of important information. And that's going to be the content in the story that we're going to talk about in a second, right? So a standard is kind of like a flag. It's like an emblem of power. It represents something. Okay. So let's see if we can read the registers. What's taking place on this side? So what are you going to write into the content section of your note takers? What are you going to write here? What's taking place? Somebody going to jump in? You want me to call on you?
It seems like a banquet after a war.
Yep, there's some sort of banquet taking place. So for this one, I would say that you need to start at the bottom, right? So you would start at the bottom. And what you see is you see people in profile, right? You see the profile carrying heavy stuff. And there's occasionally an animal, right? And there's spacing and people are different. And it kind of looks like some people are repeated over and over again. It's almost like a cartoon where they're moving throughout the frame. And then we start to see more and more people and animals in the middle. Looks like they're carrying less and less heavy stuff. We even have some really cool overlap of animals. And then at the very top, we have that feast that he was mentioning, right? So we have musicians on the end. You guys see like a bull ear right here, like playing musical instrument. Then we have a bunch of people with bald heads, right? And they're holding like a goblet, and they're seated, and they're all facing and looking at who? Who's the most important person here? And how do we know? Where are they located? How many figures in from the left are they? So count. Who's the most important person? Emily, can you tell me who the most important person on the top row is? And how do we know that?
Guy third from the left.
Right.
And you can see like he's the largest one there, and like his head kind of like goes into the frame.
Right. They mentioned that on Smart History, that he's like so important that not even the border of the decoration of the standard can like withstand his power. So his head actually goes into the frame. They move that little piece up so that his head could like expand out of it. So he's very formal and everyone is looking at him. So that really isolates him. This is on what we call the peace side of the standard. So this is after the war, right? So then we go to the flip side, we have our war elements, right? So with this one, we have to start at the bottom again, right? This is really kind of cool, okay? So what you're gonna see is you're gonna see a bunch of horse and chariots, right? See the wheels? And what's happening to the horses as they move to the right? What's happening to the horses as they move to the right? Do they look the same? Alana, what's happening to the horses?
They're starting to speed up.
They're starting to speed up, like they're starting to like go out to like a gallop. So let's like the activity, the energy is moving to the right. And you'll notice that underneath the horse's feet, some probably the opponent has been trampled to death. So we start to see dead bodies as we move across. And then when we get to the middle row, who are these guys on the left? Who do we think these guys who are really organized and well-dressed and holding, looks like swords, who are they?
Soldiers.
There's the soldiers. And of course, those are the victors, right? And I know they're the victors because who are all these guys on the right who don't have clothes and aren't wearing headdresses or helmets?
The defeated people who probably became slaves.
Exactly. So the defeated people are on the middle center, right? And they've been stripped of their clothes, so they're humiliated. And notice that they're a little bit more realistic in stance too. A lot of early Mesopotamian, Near Eastern art, as well as Egyptian, people of social status are very stiff and formal, and they're very organized. And of course, that makes sense for like for the military, right? They are like a well-oiled machine. They work together for a common good. And then the captives can be much more realistic. They're shown kind of humiliated, stripped of their clothing, and their body postures are much more realistic. We see on the top row, right? We see captives again, and then a few times we'll see soldiers kind of presenting them to the guy in the center. So the guy in the center is who? Who's this one guy in the center? Who do we think that is?
The king.
The ruler. So whoever's probably royal tomb, this is probably the same guy who's on the other side, who's sitting on the throne, right? And of course, his head breaks out of the border as well. And then he's got some of his guards and his chariot behind him. So we have this kind of inlaid piece, once again, with like lapis lazuli in the background. So once again, really expensive materials kind of denote the wealth of the ruler, that this was placed in his burial. So it was probably something he used in his lifetime, and then that was later buried with him. Okay, so when we look at like conventions of power and how people of power are represented, we normally see them, right? We see them centralized, And we normally see them larger than everyone else, right? So we don't have a lot of time, but we've got plenty of time because some of the other units are kind of small. For tomorrow will be okay, and then Wednesday we'll move into Egyptians. So we're gonna look at a few other like Near Eastern pieces. So this is what I'd like you to do right now, is I'd like you to draw a picture of a teacher and student. So I want you to draw an interaction of a teacher and student on that scrap piece of paper, okay? It doesn't have to be something that you take a long time on, right? I just want you to kind of sketch out a really basic idea of what that looks like to you. You can do it pre or post-pandemic, it's up to you. I'm interested to see what the post-pandemic looks like. What a Zoom relationship teacher-student looks like. Give you another minute or so. So just a real rough sketch. Should have played some drawing music, I apologize. Let's see. Oh darn, we're out of time, aren't we? Okay, so I know you're probably not done and I need to let you go to your next class in a second, but I just wanted to check on a few things with you guys. How many of you guys have the teacher higher on the page than the student? So when you look at it, yeah, go ahead, visually raise your hand. How many of you have the teacher higher on the page? Good. How many people have the teacher bigger? The teacher is bigger, like drawn bigger on the page. How many people have the teacher holding something in their hand? Right? Does anyone have the teacher with strange hair or wearing a hat or something like that? Strange hair. This is always the one that's a little odd, right? These are conventions of power. They're conventions of power where we always see rulers bigger, right? Typically holding something, often higher on the page. And so you think about that with the standard of the ruler was at the very top of the often they have funny hair, like the plaited hair, or they're wearing a helmet. And so these are going to be conventions of power that we see over and over again. Larger, bigger, more centralized, and so on. Okay, let's end there today. Tomorrow, we will zip through